Hello, everyone. It is a blessing, as always, to bring to you the Endangered series. We're here again, definitely praying that you are receiving. We're going live again, 5 o'clock here on the Endangered series, and we are so thankful that you are here and you're tuning in. So gather your friends, gather your loved ones, let them know that we are starting our broadcast. As always, we are thankful and we are blessed to be able to bring the Endangered series to you. This is our eighth week. Can you believe that? That we have been sharing the word. We've been focusing and pinpointing the various topics that have brought us to a place in America that we've never been. And that is really addressing racism like never before. During this year as well as the last few years, I believe that this epidemic, so to speak, rather than our pandemic that's going on, that too has brought about an awareness of how vulnerable humanity can be. But this virus, this pandemic, so to speak, and racism and inequality has George Floyd's life, his death, has essentially thrust us into a realm for us to have to really address and really take some time and look at ourselves and ask ourselves, are we doing the proper things to help us to be able to grow, to be able to make change? And I believe that as we continue to explore these atrocities that are happening in the world and in our society on Afro-American people, Black lives, I believe that we will be empowered as well as it will be a spiritual antidote, if you will, for those that may not understand the plight of Afro-Americans. And that is not to slight any other race, but when you are being lynched as well in broad daylight, as I often say, that should bring an alarm within yourself to say, hey, let's be a part of the solution versus the problem. Now today, I'm going to always start out with a story, but if you will, before I start, send us a message. Let us know that you're tuning in. We're always thankful for those individuals that are tuning in, that are participating in our broadcast. And so I'm so thankful. My wife will be joining me soon in a few minutes. She's going to be sharing on our broadcast some things today, and I believe that is going to definitely bring some enlightenment on how does it really feel when they say, I can't breathe. She's going to shed some light on that to a certain extent, not to exasperate the topic, but having some real life experience in that. I think it's very prevalent, and we're going to bring you that here momentarily. I want you to always be praying for us. We're praying for you. We're praying for your families, the transitions that people are having to make in this pandemic, as well as during this time of awareness. We're sounding an alarm that would say, hey, let's be conduits of good and things that are right, wholesome, that God can be pleased with, versus also sitting on the sideline doing nothing. So I thank you for tuning in. I'm so appreciative of that. We see people always from East Texas tuning in. We bless you. We thank you for tuning in with us, as well as around the world, around the country. We're so thankful that you have decided to participate in our broadcast. Now, if you will, as always, let us start out with a story. Our story today picks up in be it as it may, in a jail cell in North Carolina. This occurs in December of just last year, 2019. There's a 56-year-old individual man by the name of John Neville. I don't know if you've ever heard of his story, but let's share it with you today. John Neville was arrested, and he subsequently finds himself in jail. Officers pass by his cell, and they're noticing that he is on the floor. After bringing in 5 to 6 officers, they have a nurse to come in. And just this week, a clip of what transpires while the nurse and the 5 to 6 guards in the jail cell is released. It's over 26 minutes that this occurrence takes place, this interaction between Mr. Neville and these officers and this nurse. Now, the video that is released by thehill.com, you can research that or go out and look at the 2 minutes and 22 seconds that they released. It shows that Mr. Neville has presumably had a seizure in his cell. Now, while in his cell, one of the guards says, I quote, "It looks like you had a seizure." And he repeatedly tells Mr. Neville, while he's laying down on the ground, "You're okay. You're okay." He's telling him, he's not asking him if he's okay, but he's telling Mr. Neville, not being in Mr. Neville's body, but the officer tells him, "You're okay." Mr. Neville, at this point, he's fighting. In fact, he's yelling to get up. He yells, "Let me up! Let me up!" In fact, he goes on to say, "Help me!" numerous of times, "Help me!" The irony of this situation is that when you look at the video, it gives you flashbacks of what has transpired just a few months ago with George Floyd. This is in December of 2019, only 4 to 5 months before the Floyd situation ever occurred. Mr. Neville fights, "Let me up, help me." And at one point, this is strange. At one point, he says, "Mama, Mama." This grown 56-year-old man hollers for his mama. George Floyd, he too cried out for his mama. The video transitioned, and it shows them putting him in a restraining chair and taking him down the hall to another cell. And while he's there, they put a mesh cloth over his head. You can hear him aspirating, trying to breathe, trying to breathe. The second jail cell there, or the second cell that he's in, they have him laying down on a mattress, and he's still crying out to help me. At one point, he says to them, like Floyd, "I can't breathe." He says, "I can't breathe." This was months before Floyd cries out, "I can't breathe." Mr. Neville, laying in a jail cell, handcuffed, being pressed down by 5 to 6 officers. He cries out to them, "I cannot breathe." And even while man begs for his life and begs for somebody to help him, the officers, they find humor in this moment. You hear one of the officers looking at his colleagues asking, "Is everybody good?" I know you're enjoying it. That's what one of the officers says. Is everybody good? I know you're enjoying it. This point, over 29 times, Mr. Neville says, I can't breathe. In fact, you can hear him say at one point, please, let me up. Please, let me up. He's trying to get up. He's trying to catch his breath. Mr. Neville, you can hear him trying to get up, begging to get up. At some point, somebody with a little bit of common sense, I would say, decide to take the handcuffs off. He's one man, 5 grown men, 6 are pinning him down. Somebody decides to uncuff him. They take a key, put it in the handcuffs, and in their haste, the key breaks. So now Mr. Neville is still handcuffed, still trying to get air in his lungs, still trying to breathe, saying, I cannot breathe. The key breaks in the handcuffs, and somebody runs and gets padded lock, something to break it, chain, and that too doesn't help. Something to cut the handcuffs off, that doesn't help. They have to go get another tool, and time passes by. Finally, they get the handcuffs off Mr. Neville, and as he lays there, they strip him. He's laying there on the cot. They leave him there on the ground, never helping him up as his solemn request would be. But a few minutes later, the nurse walks by and she goes in and tries to get his pulse. She says, I can't hear his heart beat. After taking out her stethoscope and trying to get his pulse and hear his heartbeat, she cries out to somebody, I can't hear his heart rate. At this point, Mr. Neville is taken to the hospital where he is pronounced dead. 5 officers and the nurses charged with involuntary manslaughter. At this point, the record is shown as saying that he died suffocated during the restraint. One of the leaders of the prison or the jail where Mr. Neville, where this takes place, says that policies and procedures must change. And I believe that that is one of the issues that many Afro-American blacks are having issues with. We've been changing policies and procedures for years and nothing has changed. Lest people's heart change, we will see no change. But the man cries out 29 times, I can't breathe. If you don't have a response, or what would your response be if somebody cried out, I can't breathe? 29 times Mr. Neville does. Mr. Floyd hollers, I can't breathe. I pondered that thought. What would I do? I had to reflect on a situation that occurred right here in my home a few months ago. Actually, July the 5th. I'm going to bring my wife in because she actually experienced not someone holding her down. Let me make sure and be specific and be clear with that. But after having an allergic reaction, she experiences not being able to breathe. Raquel, join me, please. Thank you. Raquel, a few weeks ago, experiences not being able to breathe. I walked in from one room to another, and all I know, there's an emergency that is happening. My wife, that I love dearly, is standing up, walking from one side of the room. On her way out the door, she says, "Call 911." And she says something that moved me with haste. She says, "I can't breathe." At this moment, there is no time for me to contemplate or to ask questions or to tell her everything is going to be all right. I simply pick up the phone and call 911. Raquel, would you please take us through that moment and that time and how you felt, as well as some of the things that transpired, even with the paramedics once they got here and you telling them that you couldn't breathe. Take us back to just the beginning of the occurrence and bring us up to that point.
We were sitting outside. We had a few friends over, and we were sitting outside, and so I wasn't really feeling good that day. I was feeling kind of lightheaded and a little woozy. So after everyone left, we came in the house, and well, before we came in the house, I was trying to get up from the patio, and I couldn't. And I said, "Christopher, I can't walk. I need you to help me go to, get in the house." So he moved around a little bit, and then he finally came over to help me. And I couldn't get my bearings. I couldn't breathe. And so he walked me to the room and sat me on the bed, and I said, "Well, if I lay down, then I may feel better." And so not many people know this story because I didn't share it with our family members. A couple of people know the story, but as I think about it today, it makes me emotional from the standpoint of I literally saw myself dying that day. I went, once Christopher had me to sit on the bed, I thought, okay, if I just lay down, then I can get myself together, and this will pass in a few minutes. And so as I went to lay down, something jerked me to get up and move, because if I lay down, I'm gonna die. And so I started walking, and I called Big Christopher, and I said, "Listen, I can't breathe. I need you to call 911. Now, for me to say call 911 is really big, because I hate going to the doctor. I just would prefer to deal with whatever I have to do at home. But in that moment, as I was up pacing, because something kept telling me to keep moving or you're going to stop breathing. And so I paced back and forth, and it seemed like it took forever. Well, the paramedics came, and when they got here, they asked me what was going on, and I told them, and they had me to sit down. When the guy told me to sit down, he put the heart monitor things on me, and it computed on the thing that I was having a heart attack. And so at that moment, I was just thinking, oh my God, I cannot die. I mean, my thought was I'm just 49, so I didn't want to die at that time, and I didn't want to leave my son and my husband, but I kept explaining to them, I cannot breathe. And they were like, "Ma'am, you're fine, you're talking, you're sitting up, you're fine." I said, "No, I'm not. I know my body, I cannot breathe." So by this time, they put the oxygen on me. They were still trying to read the monitor. They were calling the hospital saying, "Okay, we have a 49-year-old female that is having a heart attack." And so they put the oxygen on, and then it was really, really hard. So they said, okay, well, we think you'll be okay. And they said, well, if something happens and you don't feel like you'll be okay, you can have your husband to take you to the emergency room. I sat there a minute and I could not catch my breath. And I said, I need to get up. I cannot breathe. By this time, he said, well, do you want to go? I said, yes. While I get into the ambulance, on the way to the hospital, they had me kind of sitting up because I told them I couldn't lay down. When I went to sit up, I said, listen, I can't breathe. The guy said, calm down, ma'am, you're okay. And he said, well, I have the oxygen on 100%. I'm gasping for air at this point. And so I guess, I don't know what was going on. They contacted the hospital and said, we have a 49-year-old female that is having a heart attack. Now, as I thought about that and as I was listening to him talk, it brought to light how many times somebody has been restrained and said they can't breathe, because I wasn't being restrained, but my heart rate had the guy said your heart rate is just, it was so fast until it wasn't. My blood pressure was fine, my heart rate was just out of control. So as I thought about it, I'm like, how many times do people tell people I can't breathe, and just because they're talking and they're responding, people assume that they can breathe? That's not true. Because when you get into a situation and your heart is pounding the way it is, yes, you're able to communicate. Doesn't mean that you can't breathe, but it doesn't mean that, you're lying to them. You literally are gasping for air and asking for help. The ride was long, and during the ride, the guy finally got up and walked to the back of me. He was sitting on the side of me to adjust the oxygen, and he was saying, there's nothing else I can do because I have it as high as it can go. And even though he had it as high as he can go, I still wasn't getting there. So you just imagine somebody being restrained and they're telling you, I can't breathe. I mean, literally, when your heart is in that, or whatever's going on in your body where your heart is not getting any oxygen, it's scary. And it doesn't take time, because I literally was in the car, in the back of the ambulance, like blacking out. Like, you don't understand. I have to live. I cannot die in this particular situation. By the time we got to the hospital and everything, and we got situated, and they went to running, they did all of these tests, they came back and said, one of my tests showed that I was probably passing a blood clot in my lung. Now, if that was my situation, can you imagine someone who has a medical history, or not even a medical history of anything, and somebody comes and restrains them where they're not able to breathe, and actually something is really going on with them? How scary that can be. So for me, when Christopher told me that he was going to share this, it really hit home for me, because I think we need to really, it's so much bigger than, what the media is talking about. It's really a serious thing when someone says they can't breathe, and we need to start taking that into consideration. As it relates to someone saying to you, you cannot take that lightly. If someone says to you they can't breathe, 99% of the time they are telling you the truth.
I believe that, like with Mr. Neville, as well as Mr. Floyd, I believe sometimes when we look at people, Mr. Neville, as we shared a moment ago, was in a jail cell. Mr. Floyd, here he's this large Afro-American man. Just because an individual may look strong, or they may appear to have some strength, but if they're telling us, or they're telling an individual, I can't breathe, or they're telling them to help me, at that moment, it is not to evaluate their background, the pigmentation of their skin, or even the wrong that they may have presumed to have done. I noticed that one of the articles that I wrote, it purposely highlighted or pinpoint why Mr. Neville had been incarcerated. We see that repeatedly, even with Mr. Floyd. His background was scrutinized even after his death. That's irrelevant at that moment. At that moment when he is gasping for air or telling you, I need help, what he's done in the past is irrelevant. His life at that moment is most important. I thank my wife for her courage to share today, because at that moment when she told me I can't breathe, I didn't pause. It wasn't a time for me. Once we got her in the house, it wasn't a time, as she told me the second time, it wasn't time for me to debate with her or to say, hey, that we can wait this out or lay down. At that point, it is a time to have some urgency. To have some urgency for that loved one or even that stranger. I believe that while we sit back, whether it is the 5 to 6 officers, or the nurse that watched Mr. Neville cry out, I can't breathe 29 times, didn't adhere to him saying, help me, and then to pin him down. I believe that's an indictment on our humanity and how far we've gone from the character and the identity of God that God has created us to be. He's created us to love our neighbor as ourselves. But what we are doing is, many times, we're sitting back and we're watching the plight of others because they don't look like us or sound like us. And we don't place value. We was watching a movie just the other day, my wife and I, called Ottoman's Lieutenant. And in this movie, there's a scene at the very beginning where a young, blossoming, I would say naive to a certain extent, it's a Caucasian lady. She's a young nurse aspiring to get into the medical field, and she's in her training. Something happens as she is on her shift that night. As she is on her shift, the doors swing open. 2 black men are carrying another black man. And the man that they are carrying, he's bleeding from his throat. He's bleeding from his throat. And the first 2 things that shakes this scene is, as the doors fly open, these 3 black men, one being carried, dying, if you will, bleeding from his throat. 2 of the seasoned medical individuals are there, a doctor and another nurse. The first thing that they say is, he can't be here. Not what's wrong. But here you have this young lady. She's young. She's naive. The seasoned ones say, he can't be here. He can't be at this hospital at this moment, at this time. He needs to be taken out of here. And she runs, this young lady, she runs and says, no, he's in the right place. He's in the right hospital. There's no time to take him to another place. Because of the pigmentation of his skin, the value of his life is degraded. And at that moment, the girl, she runs in to try to put some pressure in the spot where he's bleeding. And they thrust her off of the man. And they take him. The lead doctor comes in and says, get this man out of here. What is he doing here? You don't know what you're doing. They thrust the 3 men out. The man dying. They thrust him out of the room. And there's this young Caucasian girl, young woman, she's standing there with blood on her hands. She realizes the world that she is aspiring to move into the profession, the world is totally different than what she really perceives it to be. I believe that that is the sentiments that has been an awakening for the world. We're seeing it on display. That the world has come to a place that I believe that God has not intended for us to be in. A place of insensitivity, a place of lack of love and compassion for our fellow man. I want to thank my wife for coming and sharing that story. It's been so moving and enlightening to us. But I want to take you into the Word today. I want to take us to Luke chapter 23. In fact, I want to talk to us about agreement, accountability, and accomplishments. Last week we were talking about, or we were sharing how Jesus was on the cross. And before getting there, we saw all of the things that he experienced. Being accused of stirring up the people. Being marked from Pilate to Herod. And being marked by Herod. And we're going to pick up in Luke chapter 23 today. We're not going to end there, but I want to take you into that scripture and show you how man actually maneuvers. Many times not being willing to be accountable for his or her actions. In Luke chapter 23, starting at verse 10, it says, the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. And Herod, with his men of war, set him at naught and mocked him and arrayed him in a glorious robe and sent him again to Pilate. At this moment, because he is a Galilean, Pilate realizes that he's not in his jurisdiction. He sends him to Herod, and Herod, realizing that Jesus would not perform a miracle, would not put his power on display. He wouldn't flaunt it before men. Herod, after not receiving what he really wants, he commands Jesus to be sent back to Pilate. Isn't that like us? Many times when God doesn't perform like we want him to perform, when he doesn't move like we want him to move, we don't want his presence. Pilate received Jesus back, and it says in verse 12, and then I want you to pay attention to this. It says, the same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together. For before they were enmity, or they were enemies between themselves. Accountability. See, many times when we are not in agreement with one another, see, sometimes you have to stand for change. Even when people that you love or that you care about doesn't agree with you. If you notice something, they became friends after a common goal was achieved. After they came in agreement about Jesus, Herod looked at Pilate as a friend, and Pilate the same to Herod. Sometimes making friends can be a detriment to the purpose and the plan that God has for your life. Sometimes, what if Dr. King would have made friends with people that he knew that did not stand for a movement that would create change in the earth? Sometimes even change will get you killed. Or promoting change with Dr. King. Notice something, even on the other side of our race, there are people like John Kennedy. He stood for change. He wasn't an Afro-American, but he stood for change. And I believe to some degree, when you stand for change, it becomes an indictment on your life. But notice something. Just a simple request. We fast forward, we see them throng Jesus, scourge him, and then eventually take him to the cross. Not in Luke's gospel, but if you will, go over to John's gospel with me. In John chapter 19, something happens on the cross. And I believe that it is a parallel on how we should respond to our fellow man. In John chapter 19, starting at verse 26, it says, when Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciples standing by whom he loved, he said to his mother, woman, behold thy son. Jesus does not leave this earth without making sure Mary is properly covered. I don't know if there's any sentiments behind that, but I noticed in two different occasions, whether it was Mr. Floyd or Mr. Neville, they both cry out for their mama in this time where I don't know if they had some type of premonition on the inside that it was their last moment of life, but they called out for their mama. And even as Jesus was hanging on the cross, he looked down at someone to say, take care of my mama. I believe that mothers, and whether biologically or if you mother someone, I believe that is a special place that you hold. So I encourage those mothers out there that's listening to us today to make sure you continue to love like God wants you to love and be the beacon of light that somebody cries out to in their moment of need. And I believe that when you continue to hold that mantle, it will not be forgotten. Just like Jesus didn't forget his mother, I believe that God will not forget you as well. Goes on to say, then said he to the disciples, behold thy mother. And from that hour, that disciple took her unto his own home. But verse 28 is very powerful to me. It is very powerful because I believe it shows us how far we are drifting as a humanity, as a people in this day and in this time. It says, after this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Agreement, accountability. But the last thing, accomplishment. He says all things have been accomplished. He knows this. That the scriptures might be fulfilled. Jesus said, he says two words. Two words. Jesus says, I thirst. I thirst. Jesus is hanging on the cross. He says, I thirst. He doesn't make a request. He makes a statement. He doesn't, at this moment, cry out, give me water. He simply says, I thirst. He doesn't say, help me. He doesn't say, I can't breathe for being stretched wide, dropped low, and all of the weight is on his chest cavity. He doesn't say that. He simply says, I thirst. Somebody adheres to the two words that Jesus says. Somebody is not named in the text who they are, but someone goes over, takes a sponge, dips it into vinegar and margarine, takes it over, and thrusts it up to Jesus' mouth. After Jesus drinks, he simply gives up the ghost. If Jesus can be hanging on the cross and someone hear him say, I thirst, and out of compassion, though they may not know his background and what he's accused of, somebody steps up and says, I'm going to help this man. I may not agree with him. I may not know him. But in this moment, he's simply saying, I'm thirsty. As simple as a drink of water. Somebody takes, thrusts it, steps in. Their spiritual consciousness is convicted at that moment. What happens when our spiritual consciousness can hear our fellow man cry out saying, I can't breathe, and instead of moving to help, we fold our hands and do nothing? I believe what we've seen in society and what we're seeing now, that we are drifting further and further away from what God has created us to be. That is caring, that is loving. We see it. The evidence is there because we see it in our silence. We see it in our non-activity. It is an indictment on us when we fail to move before our fellow man. When we sit back, it is seen at the cross that we ought to move when somebody's hurting. Like Pilate, we are simply ignoring our accountability. We would rather pass it to somebody else. Pilate passes it to Herod, and Herod passes it back to Pilate, saying, I don't want to have anything to do with a solution. All I want is what I want. Whether in Pilate's case, I don't want to be held accountable for making hard decisions. Sometimes there will be hard decisions that have to be made that will create change. And God is waiting on you to be a conduit of change rather than sit on a cushion and be comfortable. He's holding us accountable. We're talking about being in agreement. Pilate, Herod becomes friends. So it asks, or it begs the question, who are you in agreement with? Who are you in agreement with? It may make you uncomfortable. It may make your friends or family. But who are you in agreement? Are you in agreement with the Black Lives Matter movement? Are you in agreement? Or are you making it right by just simply saying all lives matter? We're not saying that all lives doesn't matter, but what we're saying is, when was the last time that one individual that looked like you was being hanged from a tree? When was the last time that somebody recorded somebody that looked like you with a knee on their neck? See, sometimes we measure in the minors. We minor in those things that we should be majoring in. Sometimes we have underground agreements that's taking place, that's hindering progress. The last thing I want to talk about is where Jesus says all things was accomplished. All things, knowing that all things were accomplished. Jesus knowing that he had did what God has sent him in the earth to do. My question to you as I finish this 8th chapter of the Endangered series is to ask you today, in this moment, have you accomplished the things that God has called you to do? Have you accomplished the things that he has laid upon your heart, but you have been at peace at being at peace? Sometimes, in order for change to happen, war has to take place. Sometimes you have to go into battle and fight for something. My wife often says to me, she says, you know what? Our ancestors, people would often say, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. You got to stand. We have to learn to stand Because if you don't stand for other folk, what will happen when you want somebody to stand for you? We're talking about agreement, accountability, and accomplishments. We haven't forgotten about forgiveness, but I believe that today God would have us speak on that thought. Remember, what would you do if Jesus would have said, I thirst? Was Jesus in Mr. Floyd or Mr. Neville saying, I can't breathe? We're all God's creations. We're all his people. And I believe that when one is hurting, we as our fellow man should pause and come to their aid. Just like somebody did at the cross, we should do for one another, even in this time, even in our lives. Hey, may God bless you. May God keep you. I pray that you've gotten something out of this 8th chapter of the Endangered series. I thank my wife. She's not the type to want to be in front of the camera, but to come on to our broadcast and share her experience about how it feels when one can't breathe. She wasn't being restrained. You just imagine someone that is restrained. In Mr. Neville's case and in Mr. Floyd's case, they died, but I thank God that he spared my wife's life, that she was able to get the proper care. But it took people moving with haste, not being complacent, for her to be sitting here today with us. Hey, may God bless you again. May God keep you. I pray you have a great week. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, here on the Endangered series. God bless you. May God keep you, is our prayer. See y'all next week.